welcome back. Thanks for joining us for day 2, part 2 of our series on Jonah, learning a lesson from one who probably didn't. Yesterday, we went through the first 6 verses of chapter 1, and we left off. There's a huge storm on the sea that the boat that Jonah's in is being tossed and turned. It's about to be broke up, and quite unusual, the captain of the boat is prompting, asking Jonah to turn back to his God, to the real God, to pray. Jonah hasn't prayed. All he's been doing up until this point is trying to flee the presence of the Lord. So let's pick up the story in verse 7 of chapter 1. I'm going to read. We're going to get through the rest of chapter 1 today, all the way through verse 17. So starting verse 7. And they said to one another, "Come, let us cast lots, that we may know for whose cause this trouble has come upon us." So they cast lots, and the lot fell to Jonah. This was a common thing, throwing the die, drawing the short stick. This is what was done back then to determine, and like in this case, who had caused the trouble, or who's the one that was chosen. And in the verse reads, the whole crew, they're casting lots specifically, and it says that we may know for whose cause this trouble has come upon us. It's an interesting verse for us to reflect upon personally. We know that Jonah's trying to flee the presence of the Lord. He seems to be pretty stubborn. He's obviously being disobedient, and now there's a big storm. And, sometimes we need to really consider what I think is a truth, that our stubbornness and our disobedience can put others in harm's way. Others lose in our disobedience. Others lose in our selfishness. And if that's true, and I believe it is, then I think the other side of the coin is true as well. That maybe, just maybe, others win in our obedience. Others win in our selflessness, in our sacrificial living. So they cast lots, and the lot, of course, it fell on Jonah. You see, at this point in the story, the problem wasn't the ship, how it was loaded. It wasn't the unbelievers. It's not the storm. It was Jonah. I'm sure, possibly, I guess, Jonah was maybe having thoughts like, why did they put so much cargo on this ship? Why, here I am on a ship with all these unbelievers. Or like, if only this storm hadn't, I'd be okay. And none of those things were the problem. What Jonah needed to consider was his disobedience that was at the root cause of what was going on. Verse 8, they said to him, "Please tell us, for whose cause is this trouble upon us? What is your occupation? Where do you come from? What is your country? And of what people are you? Please tell us." They're crying out, whose, what, where? Jonah was going to have to respond. Would you be ready to give a response in that situation? Verse 9, and so he said to them, "I'm a Hebrew, and I fear the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and dry land." Jonah responds by stating he's a Hebrew and fears the Lord. Really? Really? If he was fearing the Lord, would he be on the journey that he's on? But at least, he let them know, I am the cause of the trouble. Then the men were exceedingly afraid, and they said to him, "Why have you done this?" For the men knew that he fled from the presence of the Lord because he had told them. And they asked him, "Why have you done this?" Like, what is going on? Why would you do this? It must have been really weird for Jonah to have unbelievers asking him, "Why are you fleeing? Why are you avoiding God?" I don't know, maybe your circumstances is challenging right now. And maybe there's some things in your response, your positioning between the Lord. Maybe it's a question that needs to be asked yourself. Why are you fleeing or avoiding God? Starting at verse 11, and they said to him, what shall we do that the sea may be calm for us? For the sea was growing worse and worse, more tempestuous. He said to them, pick me up and throw me in the sea. Then the sea will become calm for you. For I know that this great tempest, this great storm, is because of me. Nevertheless, the men rowed hard to return to land, but they could not, for the sea continued to grow worse and worse against them. Therefore they cried out to the Lord and said, we pray, O Lord, please do not let us perish for this man's life, and do not charge us with innocent blood, for you, O Lord, have done as it pleased you. I mean, here now we have unbelievers not calling out to their little gods, but to the God. It's an amazing thing. And so they pick up Jonah, they threw him into the sea, and the sea ceased from its raging. And then the men feared the Lord exceedingly, and offered a sacrifice to the Lord and took vows. Verse 16. I mean, if we go back to verse 10, it said that the men were exceedingly afraid. At that time, they were exceedingly afraid of a number of things: the storm, the ship breaking up, and themselves dying. And now in verse 16 it reads, then the men feared the Lord. In both states, they were fearing just different things. They went from dreading the raging sea to fearing the Lord. They came to a reverent awe and believing faith. And then in verse 17, the last verse today, now the Lord had prepared a great fish to swallow Jonah, and Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. Jonah, a man who had yet prayed in this situation. We'll pick up tomorrow, starting chapter 2, to continue the story. We hope you join us. Until then, God bless.